Wyoming Territory, July 1887. The train hissed into the dusty station at Buffalo with a long, shrill cry, and every soul on the platform turned to look not at the machine, but at what it carried. Virginia Tate stepped down onto the wooden planks with her carpetbag clutched tight in both hands. Her gray dress plain and creased from 2 days' travel, her brown hair twisted into a sensible bun. She blinked against the sun, heart pounding. This was supposed to be a beginning. A tall woman in a blue bonnet approached her with a sharp look and a folded letter in hand. "You Miss Virginia Tate?" "Yes, ma'am. I am Mrs. Halpern. My son sent for you." The woman's mouth flattened as she looked Virginia over. "You don't match the description." "Excuse me?" He wrote refined and comely. She sniffed. "You're plain as a fence post. My son deserves better. You were a waste of a train ticket." Virginia's stomach dropped. "I am educated. I can cook, sew, and we'll find someone else. Go back to where you came from." The woman turned and walked off before Virginia could gather a single word. The platform emptied. The train pulled away. Virginia stood alone, blinking against the tears building behind her eyes. Then a voice spoke behind her, low and sure. "Well, I think you look just right." She turned. The man standing a few paces away was tall, maybe 30, with a worn hat in his hands and sun on his shoulders. His shirt was rolled at the sleeves, revealing forearms tanned from work, and his eyes, a deep green, met hers without flinching. She swallowed. "Were you listening?" He gave a nod. "Hard not to, ma'am." "I suppose you agree with her," she said, chin lifting. "About being plain." He stepped closer, quietly. "No, ma'am, I don't." She looked down, unsure what to say. He reached out and took her carpetbag without asking. "Name's Jedediah Ellis. Folks call me Jed. I got a small place just west of here. I was coming to check the mail, but I reckon I can get you settled somewhere first." She hesitated. "You do not know me, and you do not know anyone else in this town. I figure that makes us even." He turned without waiting for an answer and started walking toward the hitched wagon near the water trough. Virginia followed, her legs moving before her thoughts caught up. He helped her into the wagon bed gently, like she was made of something breakable. "Thank you," she said quietly. He looked at her again that same steady way. "You got somewhere to go?" She shook her head. "Well," he said, taking the reins, "I reckon we will figure something out." They rode in silence for a while, the wagon creaking over dry ground, the fields stretching golden around them. The sky above was wide and endless. "Why were you at the station?" she asked finally. He shrugged. "Hoped for a letter. Did not get one." "From who?" "My sister. She is back east with her boys. I send money when I can." She nodded. "I was meant to marry a man I never met, but he had a farm and I thought it would be a good life." Jed gave a small hum. "You deserve better than someone who judges with their eyes." She looked at him, surprised. "You do not even know me." He smiled just a little. "No, but I can tell you are brave. You came all this way alone." The ride took over an hour, the sun dipping behind the hills as they reached his land. The house was small but well built, with a porch and a barn beside it. A dog barked once from the shade of the porch steps, then trotted over with a wagging tail. "I will sleep in the barn," she said before he could offer. "No, ma'am, you will take the bed. I have a cot in the barn already." "I cannot." "You can," he said simply, climbing down and offering his hand. She took it. That first night, she sat on the edge of the bed while he lit a lamp and set a tin plate of stew down for her. "Thank you," she whispered. He passed her a spoon. "You are welcome, Virginia." She looked up, startled by how gently he said her name. She had not heard it spoken kindly in a very long time. In the days that followed, she helped where she could, mending shirts, sweeping floors, feeding the chickens out back. Jed worked the land, returning each day dusted in soil and sweat, always quiet, always steady. One morning, a week after her arrival, she stood on the porch with a bowl of water and saw him limping toward the house, his shirt torn and blood on his arm. Jed! She rushed down the steps. What happened? Came across a pair of boys out by the fence line. One was hurt. The other was trying to carry him. Said their pa left 'em weeks ago. She helped him inside. You brought them here? He nodded. Virginia turned. 2 boys stood just outside the door, dirty and wide-eyed. One leaned heavy on the other. Come in, she said at once. We will clean you up. The older boy looked no more than 10. Our names are Caleb and Cole. Virginia knelt. You are safe now. That night the house was full. She dressed wounds, made cornbread, and tucked the boys into the cot. Jed sat nearby, watching her with something new in his eyes. You are good with them, he said. I helped raise my younger brothers, she answered, smoothing the blanket over Cole's thin shoulders. And I always wanted children. He was quiet a moment. You are not plain, Virginia. She turned to him, startled. You are not, he said again, firmer this time. I do not know how that woman at the station could not see it. She stepped closer, heart loud in her chest. I thought I would be alone forever, she whispered. He stood, close now, his voice low. You are not alone anymore. Their hands met first, then his arms around her, then her head on his chest. And in that quiet, between the sounds of sleeping boys and the wind outside, she realized something. She had not been sent away from her life that day at the station, she had been sent toward it. And it was standing right in front of her. The wind changed with August. The mornings came cooler now, and the cottonwoods along the creek behind the barn had begun to yellow at the edges. Virginia stood at the stove early, sleeves rolled and hair loose, stirring cornmeal into a kettle while the boys still slept in their corner of the loft. Jed had left before dawn to mend a broken fence rail near the southern field, and she hadn't heard the wagon since. She moved with quiet purpose, but her thoughts tugged elsewhere. Each day had settled into rhythm chores, meals, tending to the boys, stitching Jed's worn shirts, but something deeper had begun to shift inside her. It wasn't just the comfort of shared work or the quiet way Jed listened when she spoke. It was the steadiness of how he made space for her to belong without ever asking her to prove she did. By mid-morning, she found the boys out back, Cole dragging a bent stick through the dirt, while Caleb tried to balance a flat rock on his head. You two have time to spare? She asked, lifting the hem of her skirt to step outside. Caleb grinned. We finished feeding the hens. Cole swept the porch. Virginia glanced at the broom leaning against the wall, still dusty. Is that right, Cole? He gave a crooked smile and shrugged his small shoulders. Then I suppose you've earned some free time. She sat on the step beside them, the sun warming her back. Do either of you know how to read? Caleb looked at her sideways. Some. Pa didn't think it mattered much. Cole said nothing, but his eyes stayed on her. Well, she said, I do, and I brought a few books with me in my bag. If you'd like, I can teach you. Caleb's chin tipped up. You'd do that? I'd be glad to. Later, when Jed returned with a splintered rail balanced across his shoulder, Virginia met him halfway down the path. His shirt clung to him, sweat dark at the collar, and a streak of dried blood curved along his forearm. He set the rail against the shed wall and wiped his brow with the back of his hand. What happened to your arm? Fence post caught me wrong, he said, not meeting her gaze. You should let me clean it. He hesitated. I've had worse. She crossed her arms. And worse can turn to worse still without care. He followed her into the house, quiet as ever. She brought water and clean linen, then gently wiped the dirt from the shallow cut. He winced but didn't pull away. "You don't speak much about yourself," she said, wrapping the cloth snug. "I speak when I have something worth saying." She looked up then, eyes searching his. "And do you ever feel like telling me what made you choose this life? This land? This quiet?" His jaw shifted, and for a moment she thought he might deflect again. But then he sat back, eyes on the floorboards. "My father was a hard man. He believed in work and silence. I left home when I was 16. Took a job driving cattle, then one mending fences. Saved enough to buy this place 5 years ago. Figured I'd rather build something quiet than run from noise all my life." She nodded slowly. "I think that's a kind of bravery." Jed looked up. "Folks don't usually call it that." "They should." He didn't smile, but something eased behind his eyes. That evening, after the boys went to sleep, she found Jed sitting on the porch steps, arms resting on his knees, watching the last of the light slip behind the ridge. She sat beside him, their shoulders close but not touching. "I've been thinking," she said after a while, "about what comes next." He glanced over, slow. "What do you mean?" "I came here expecting to marry a stranger. Felt foolish at the time. But now—" She drew in a breath. "Now it feels like maybe I hadn't come to the wrong place after all. Just the wrong man." Jed didn't speak at first. His eyes stayed on the horizon, where the stars had begun to prick through the fading blue. "You've made this place different," he said finally. "Lighter. I look forward to coming home now." Her breath caught. He leaned back slightly, turning to face her. "I don't want to press you, Virginia, but if there's a part of you thinking about staying, I'd like you to know. I'd want that. I'd want you." She reached for his hand, fingers threading slowly through his. "I have been thinking about staying," she said, "and I'd like to build something here. With you." He turned her hand over, running his thumb across the back of it like it was something precious. "I don't have much," he said. "You have enough." They sat that way long after the sun had gone, hands clasped, the wind soft through the grass, the silence between them full of promise. By mid-September, the fields had turned brittle and gold, and the nights came on fast. Virginia had taken to lighting the lamp earlier, its glow stretching long across the floorboards while the boys played with carved sticks near the hearth. Jed would return each evening with dust on his boots and the scent of dry wind in his clothes. The days had narrowed, but something between them had grown wide. One afternoon, as she boiled lye soap over the outdoor fire, Caleb came up lugging a crooked branch. "Jed says this wood's no good for fixing the fence," he said, dropping it near the stump where she'd been cutting up last week's laundry. "It might not be good for fencing," Virginia answered, "but it'll do for stirring soap." He grinned and stayed beside her, watching the gray bubbles rise through the steam. "Do you think we'll stay here always?" he asked after a while. Virginia didn't answer right away. She stirred the pot slow and steady, then set the stick aside and wiped her hands on her apron. "I think if something feels like home," she said, "you make it so." He blinked up at her, thoughtful, then ran off toward the barn where Cole was chasing after the hens again. Jed came up an hour later with a coil of wire slung over his shoulder. "South gate's near ready to fall," he said, glancing at the fire. "You been out here the whole time?" "I lost track," she said, brushing ash from her sleeve. "Soap takes its time. I brought back some flour. Thought maybe you'd want it for baking. You didn't have to go all the way into town. I needed nails anyhow." She took the sack, fingers brushing his as she did, and looked up at him. "Thank you." He paused, then nodded toward the barn. "You ever seen a calf born?" "Only once, back in Missouri." "Well, you might see it again before supper. Old Brindle's pacing." Virginia followed him out behind the barn, where the pasture fence leaned against the edge of the creek. The cow was restless, her sides heaving, eyes wild but not in pain yet. Jed crouched nearby, hands loose at his knees. "She's early," he said. Virginia stood beside him, arms folded. "Will she need help?" "Maybe. I'll stay out here till it's done. I'll bring you something warm." He looked up then, the lines beside his eyes softening. "I'd like that." She made stew and wrapped cornbread in a towel before carrying it out under the stars. He was still there, quiet, the calf half-born and struggling. "She's trying," he said, taking the bowl from her. "But it's stuck." Virginia didn't speak. She sat beside him on the grass, watching the cow strain and shift. After a long while, Jed set the empty bowl aside and rose. "Hold the lantern." She did, steady despite her nerves, as he moved in close to the cow, hands firm but careful. He worked without panic, guiding the calf free with practiced patience. When it finally slid out onto the grass, slick and shivering, he eased it close to the mother. Virginia let out a breath she hadn't known she'd been holding. Jed wiped his hands on a rag and came back to her side. "You did well. I only held the light. That's more than most would have done." She looked up at him, the lantern glow catching the edge of his jaw. "You're gentle when it matters." He didn't deny it, just looked at her the way he had that first day, like he saw something worth seeing. They walked back to the house together, the boys already asleep inside. Later, she stood by the wash basin, brushing the dust from her dress. When Jed stepped beside her, his voice low, "I've been thinking on a thing." She turned toward him. "I'd like to build onto the house," he said. "2 more rooms. One for the boys, another for if you wanted to stay." Virginia's hands stilled on the basin edge. "I want to stay," she said. His voice dropped. "Not just for the boys. Not just for the roof." Her throat tightened. "I know." He reached for her hand, slow and certain. "Would you be my wife, Virginia?" She nodded once, then again. "Yes." Jed drew her close then, and she let him, her face tucked beneath his chin, his arms around her like the walls of something she'd never had before. Safety, belonging, love that arrived not with thunder but with quiet, enduring grace. The first frost came quiet, softening the garden rose and dusting the window panes before sunrise. Virginia woke early and pulled the quilt tight around her shoulders, listening to the hush that settled over the land when the world held its breath between seasons. She stepped to the stove, feeding the fire back to life with kindling from the basket, then moved carefully through the dim house, her bare feet finding the worn spots on the floorboards by heart. The wedding was to be held in 2 days' time. Jed had asked no preacher. They'd written a letter to the circuit rider who came through once a season, but the man was still 2 weeks east. Jed had simply said, "We'll speak the words ourselves, and let the land witness it." Virginia had agreed. She wanted no crowd, no fuss, only truth. She found Jed outside near the barn, driving nails into the new doorframe of the half-finished lean-to. He stood when he saw her, lowering the hammer and wiping his hands on the back of his trousers. "You're up early," he said. "So are you." He glanced toward the pasture. "Fence'll hold through the winter. I'm more worried about the roof on that shed. Snow'll come hard this year." She stepped closer, arms folded against the cold. "I've been thinking about the spring." His brow lifted. "I'd like to plant more than just potatoes and cabbage. Berries, perhaps. Beans. The soil near the creek is softer." Jed nodded slowly. "We'll need to clear the stone from that patch. I'll start next week." He looked at her then, with a steadiness that warmed more than the rising sun. "You're not waiting to see if you'll stay?" "I already said yes." Jed's lips parted like he might speak, but the sound of hooves clattering over hard ground pulled their eyes toward the north road. A rider crested the hill, his coat flapping behind him, a satchel bouncing at his side. Jed stepped forward, eyes narrowing. "That's Caleb's uncle," he said. Virginia's stomach tightened. The man dismounted before the wagon even stopped moving, dust rising around his boots. He was wiry, with a beard that hadn't been trimmed in weeks and eyes that moved too fast. "Name's Owen," he said. "Their ma was my sister. I heard they were here." Jed didn't offer his hand. "They are. I've come to take them." Virginia stepped forward. "They've been well cared for." Owen glanced at her, then at the house. "I ain't saying you didn't try, but they're family." Jed's voice stayed even. "They never mentioned you. I was up in Montana working claims. Didn't know what happened till word caught me in Billings." Virginia looked toward the barn where Caleb and Cole were stacking kindling, unaware. "You got proof of who you are?" Jed asked. Owen pulled a folded letter from his coat, the handwriting faded and familiar. Virginia recognized the curve of the words. It was their mother's, dated nearly a year before her death. Jed read it, then passed it to her. There was no denying it. "I'll take them to Sheridan," Owen said. "Got a room and steady work there." Virginia stepped back, her throat tight. "They've known nothing but loss. And now you'd take them from the only place that's held them steady?" "I didn't come to argue," Owen said. "Only to do what's right." The boys came around the barn then, Cole dragging a stick, Caleb chewing a piece of ryegrass. They stopped short when they saw the stranger. "What's going on?" Caleb asked. Virginia crouched. "This man says he's your uncle, Caleb." Cole's eyes went wide. "We have an uncle?" Owen stepped forward. "Your ma was my sister. I didn't know you were left behind. I came to fetch you." The boys looked at Jed, then Virginia, unsure. Caleb swallowed. "Do we have to go?" Jed knelt beside them. "You get to choose." Owen frowned. "They're children." Jed didn't look up. "They've earned the right to be heard." Virginia stayed still, her hands clasped. The wind stirred the dry grass. Caleb turned to Owen. "You didn't come when Ma died. You didn't come when Pa left. You didn't even write." Owen shifted, jaw tight. "I didn't know." "I'm not going," Caleb said. Cole stepped behind Virginia's skirt, silent. "You can stay till spring," Jed said to Owen. "Let them come to know you. If they wish to go then, we won't stop them." Owen looked at each of them, then at the house, then back at the boys. "I can do that." Virginia exhaled. Jed touched her arm once, brief and grounding. That night, after the boys had gone to bed and Owen had taken to the hayloft, Virginia stood by the window, watching frost creep up the glass. Jed came up beside her, wrapping a wool blanket over her shoulders. "You didn't flinch today," he said. "I was afraid. And still you stood." She turned to him. "I want to raise them. I want to raise children with you. I want a life that's shaped by our hands." His voice was quiet. "Then that's what we'll build." He lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm, slow and sure. Outside, the frost deepened. But inside, the fire was steady, and the warmth between them held fast. The morning of their wedding, the hills wore frost like a veil. Virginia stood in the quiet bedroom, brushing her hair in slow strokes, the bristles catching where the wind had tangled it earlier. She wore her best calico dress, the slate blue one with the narrow cuffs and 3 buttons at the collar. She'd let down her hair for the first time in weeks. Outside, a crow called from the cottonwood, and below the window, she heard Caleb chopping kindling with careful rhythm. Cole's laughter followed, lighter than she'd heard it in days. Owen had kept to himself since the boys chose to stay, helping with chores and sleeping in the lean to when the nights weren't too bitter. He hadn't pressed the matter again. She stepped into the kitchen to find Jed at the table, tying a clean neckcloth. His hair was damp from washing, and he'd shaved close, the scar along his jaw more visible than usual. "You look ready," she said. His eyes lifted to hers. "I've been ready." He reached for her hand without hesitation, and they stepped outside together, crossing the yard where the boys waited, boots polished and cheeks pink with cold. Jed had chosen the ridge near the creek, beneath the oldest cottonwood atoll, leaning tree that had survived lightning once and split at the crown. Virginia had always liked the way it still grew, even lopsided. They stood in the grass, breath visible, the wind tugging at her skirt. Jed held her hand like it was something he'd earned. "I never expected to share my land," he said, voice low, "but I want every piece of it to hold your name." She didn't look away. "I never thought I'd find a place where I could stop surviving and start living. You've given me that." Caleb stepped forward with the ring, a small silver band Jed had traded for in town weeks ago. He placed it in his uncle's palm, then stepped back solemn. Jed slid it onto her finger, his thumb brushing the top of her knuckle once. "I vow to stand beside you, whether the land's green or dust," he said. "To build with you, to listen, and to never hold your silence against you." Virginia took his hands between both of hers. "I vow to make this house a home," she said. "To speak truth, to carry what we build, and to love you with the quiet strength you've taught me." They didn't need a witness beyond the boys and the wind. Jed leaned forward and kissed her, brief and certain, his hand cradling the back of her head. Caleb hooped once, and Cole clapped. That night, after stew and fresh bread were shared around the table, Virginia tucked the boys into their new room, 2 narrow cots, a shared chest, and a window that rattled when the wind turned. She kissed Cole's forehead, then smoothed Caleb's quilt, and left the door open behind her. Back in the kitchen, Jed was washing the dishes without a word, his sleeves rolled to the elbow. She dried beside him, their arms brushing now and then. When they finished, he turned to her and offered his hand again, not as he had before, but as a husband would. She took it. They crossed the room to the bed they now shared, the lamp casting soft gold across the quilt. He sat beside her, pulling off his boots with a quiet sigh. "Do you ever regret not being elsewhere?" she asked. "Somewhere the land's easier, the winter's shorter." He shook his head. "I'd rather work hard for something real than have ease without meaning." She leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. "Then we'll make the meaning together." He kissed her temple, then her cheek, then her mouth slow, like he had all winter to learn her. And he did. That night, they loved without rush, without doubt, with the kind of care that asked nothing and offered everything. The weeks that followed hardened the ground and brought snow in fits. Virginia taught the boys to write their names clear and steady. Jed built a coop closer to the barn to keep the hens from freezing. Owen left after the first snowfall, leaving behind a small pouch of coins and a note for the boys that Caleb folded and kept beneath his pillow. By March, Virginia caught Jed watching her more often, a quiet wonder in his gaze that he never put to words. She didn't ask him to. Some feelings were better shown than said. In May, the new baby came a girl with dark hair and a mouth set in a familiar line. Caleb named her Willa, after a book Virginia had read them one winter night. Jed built a cradle with pine from the eastern ridge, and Cole carved a small bird into the headboard. That summer, they cleared the patch near the creek, just as Virginia had hoped. Beans took quickly, and the soil yielded more than they'd expected. Jed said nothing, but each harvest he placed in her hands like an offering. Years passed. The boys grew tall and broad-shouldered, working beside Jed with easy rhythm. Willa followed Virginia around the kitchen like a shadow, asking endless questions and pulling flour into her hair. And through every season, Virginia and Jed remained the same in ways that mattered: quiet, steady, certain in the bond they'd made beneath the leaning cottonwood. They never needed to speak of love again, because they showed it in the 100 unseen things of every day. A hand on a back, a blanket pulled higher in the night, boots mended without being asked. And in that life built not with ease, but with truth, Virginia found her peace. Not the kind that comes with silence, but the kind that comes with being fully seen and loved anyway. The land never softened, but it grew what they planted, and always they grew with it.